Scanning for audio.
Radio from Garrow.
Welcome to another WHOOVERVILLE 8 panel. This interview is Sophie Aldread, Eric Seyward and Matthew Dale, interviewed by the Pubcast, with interjections you may find familiar.
Okay, so if we just all go along the line and introduce ourselves. So I'm Nick, I'm a podcaster, I'm from the Pubcast in Leicester. With me we've got...
Sorry, the Pubcast.
The Pubcast,
That sounds like a good one.
Yeah, it came from a Doctor Who group in a pub, we just started doing a Pubcast.
A Pubcast.
A Pubcast.
I like it.
So next to me I've got...
I'm Sophie Aldread, and amongst other things, I guess I'm principally known for playing Ace in Doctor Who.
Hi, I'm Matthew Dale, and I played Little John, the first Little John in Rebels of Sherwood in Doctor Who. Yes.
And at the end we have...
My name's Eric Seyward, and I'm a writer, and I was also script editor on Doctor Who back in the 80s. There I was young and beautiful.
And you still are.
Oh, you still are.
Sweetness.
Okay, so a generic question for all of you is how did you get involved with Doctor Who? Whoever wants to start.
I want to hear Eric first.
Start with Eric.
I'm bored of my own story.
Mine's very boring. I was working in radio, and then script editor of Doctor Who, Christopher Bidme, was trawling around for writers on Who, and he contacted head of drama in radio and said, "Can you recommend anybody?" And I was one of a number that was sort of pointed at. And he approached me and asked me whether I'd be interested, and I said yes. And he said, "Well, if you'd care to submit a storyline, we can take it from there." And so we did. So 6 years later, I was leaving Doctor Who.
I was lucky in a way. I was with my acting agency, and they contacted me, and it was all hush hush on telling me what I was going to be doing. They said I was going to be in Doctor Who, and I said fantastic. So I said yes to it, not knowing what to do, and I actually found out literally last minute what I was doing, and I was so impressed. I've been with my acting agency for about over 20 years, and finally they get me something really good, which was Doctor Who.
Sophie?
Yeah, well, I was doing theatre in the back row of the chorus in Fiddler on the Roof up in Manchester, at the Opera House with Topol, who did the original Tevye in the film. And my agent put me up for 3 episodes of Doctor Who, and I came down to London and did an audition, and then came down a couple of weeks later for a recall. And initially it was for 3 episodes. I'd never even been in a TV studio before, didn't even have a screen test, and then found out I got the job. But not only that, for the 3 episodes, it was actually would I be interested in taking over the role as Doctor Who's assistant, because Bonnie Langford was thinking of leaving. So it was just like unbelievable story, really. So yeah, it was amazing for me.
Yeah. So had all of you seen Doctor Who before you appeared in it?
Yeah, I grew up watching Doctor Who. My doctor was John Pertwee. I think I must have been, well, I was around at the time of Patrick Troughton, but I don't think we had a TV at the time, because you didn't in those days, did you? It wasn't sort of like everyone watches this, everyone. So yeah, the first one I really remember is John Pertwee, and I loved it, and I used to make my brother watch it on the sofa while I looked at it, the scary bits through a crack in the door, so that I could shut the door if I needed to. And then I watched it. I remember John Pertwee rematerialising into Tom Baker, and it was my mum who informed me of that from the paper on a car journey. I was absolutely outraged. I thought, how dare they change the Doctor? Plus ça change. I mean, everybody thinks that, don't they, now? Even now, the kids get really heartbroken when the Doctor regenerates. I thought, well, John Pertwee is the Doctor. This guy, Tom Baker, he's going to be rubbish, which shows how much I knew. So I watched Tom, and I think I watched a bit of Peter, and then went away to university. I wasn't a die-hard fan, as I now know die-hard fans to be, but I definitely watched it as part of my childhood and very fond of it. So yes, I was away at university for most of Peter's and all of Colin's. So I was delighted to be contacted and asked to audition.
My doctor, it's actually an honour to actually be here, is Sylvester McCoy.
Aww.
And of course, it's a nice honour to be with Sophie as Ace.
Oh, that's nice.
So I grew up with him as my doctor. He actually came to see me in my first proper play. I did a kind of play called the Community Play. It's based in a local area, Dorchester, where I'm born and bred, and basically about history of the area. And he was actually the first main big actor to actually come and see me perform, because he knew the director. But when I was introduced to him, I had that really awful feeling. You know, when you completely blank someone, you absolutely had no idea who it was. I was gutted, actually. I met him, and I was introduced to him. It was just after I'd met him, when he'd gone, I then realised who he was. And I was like, oh, no. But I've managed to meet him since and got autographs and photos. But as I say, my assistant would be you, Sophie. And so I'm actually really pleased to be on a podcast with you. And Eric as well. So he's my doctor, and I've grown up with him, and that's where I started. And as I say, my next doctor now is Peter Capaldi. So, but my number one doctor will be Sylvester, and I hope to someday do a convention with him, as well as maybe Sophie as well at the same time.
Lovely.
So had you seen the show before you took over as script editor, Eric?
Yes, I had, but not for a very long time. When I was asked to write The Visitation, I don't think I'd seen an episode of Doctor Who for about 10 years. Hence why it's, the story itself reflects another period rather than what was currently being done on Doctor Who.
Yeah, I mean, when you came in as script editor, did you have an idea of the direction you wanted to take the series in? Or
well, eventually, I mean, when I took over script editor, there was very little material for that season. Forgotten his name.
Was it Andrew?
Chris
Bidmead.
Chris Bidmead, sorry about that. Chris Bidmead had left in November, and with nothing in the pot for the next season. And Anthony Root had taken over. He was just doing a 3-month period, and he hadn't actually got things underway. And then I came in around about April and did the best I could. It was a matter of trying to keep up with things rather than having great plans. After I'd settled down, of course, then I'm looking around thinking, where can we take this show? Because it was still following Tom in the way that it had been presented by him, and I thought it was. And we had Peter coming in, and I thought we really got to sort of shift this over. So we had a younger Doctor. We could make him more of an action man. There was a lot going on in the cinema that was full of action, things like Star Wars and so on. We didn't attempt to emulate them, but of course the budgets made it impossible. But you've got to keep an eye on what's happening, otherwise you just very quickly look incredibly old-fashioned. So that was the attempt to pull it into a greater adult audience, hence what we finally did, I hope.
Yeah, so Sophie, when you came in as Ace, did you have any say into the character, or was it kind of you were told this is what the character's like, this is how you've got to play it, or did it kind of evolve?
It was a bit of both, really, because I got the script for Dragonfire and really loved the character as written on the page. I mean, Ian Briggs had just done the most fantastic job of creating a very realistic character anyway. I'd come from the world of community theatre, children's theatre, where and the kind of person I was, where I did have a lot of input. So I just sort of assumed that that's what you did in TV as well. And Sylvester was very into the idea of having this different kind of relationship with the companion, partly to help him with his lines, because he realised very early on that if he had what's this? If he was saying, well, this is a so-and-so, I would say, what's happening? Where are we going? What are we doing? He would have to say everything. He would have to have all the lines. Whereas if he turned into a sort of mentor, teacher type doctor, then he could say to me, well, what do you think this is, Ace? And I would have to come up with all the gobbledygook that he didn't then have to learn. So it was all a very clever ploy. Anyway, but Andrew Cartmel, the script editor, was really kind of keen on the character of Ace, and he really wanted that development of her character and the relationship between her and the Doctor to be kind of very realistic. And so I was very lucky in that there wasn't really much to ever interfere with the characterisation as written, because the writers that Andrew had got really took on the character and produced great dialogue, and there wouldn't have been anything that I wouldn't have wanted to say or do. I certainly had a big say in my costume, again because I thought kind of, well, that's what you do. Well, actually, Andrew asked me. He said when I went to the read-through, I was wearing a pair of Doc Martin boots, stripy tights or socks, I think, some cut-off army shorts and a stripy T-shirt. And he said, that's a really good look. He said, do you think that would be good for Ace? And I said, yeah. And because he'd said that to me, I kind of then went and researched because I was 24 at the time, playing 16. So I actually went and looked at what 16-year-olds were wearing in the clubs in London, and the Face magazine was full of these girls wearing those puffy jackets with badges and safety pins and baseball caps. Couldn't wear a cap because it's a nightmare for lighting if you wear a hat on, like a baseball cap wouldn't have worked. Could have worn it backwards, I suppose, but I'm glad I didn't. And do you remember at that time the Beastie Boys were all the rage, and they had these necklaces that they wore, big chains with VW badges that they'd nicked off cars. Well, we thought we'd better not do that because it might be encouraging the youth to nick VW badges and so on. But that was the kind of look. And I went and showed the costume designer these pictures and what about this, what about that? And we went shopping together and had a great time and found all this stuff that I was very happy with. Janet is so cross about that. She doesn't like that at all, that I was able to have such a big input into my costume.
I think she was in high heels everywhere, wasn't she?
Yeah. And very short skirts. But it was a product of its time, because 1987 was a very different time. Even in those few years, things were changing for women, thank goodness, and young women on TV. And although there wasn't really... EastEnders had just started. I think Susan Tully was probably the only other young female feisty character on TV at the time. So I'm so proud of the character. Yeah, I really am. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
That's right. Don't worry, it's filling the time. Now, of course, you worked on robots with Sherwood, so was it a kind of dream job, was it?
Yes. Easy answer. For costume wise, they fitted me with what I'm roughly wearing. I've kind of just about got to what level I can do in a costume. Okay, I've just been buying myself a bow and arrow recently, this week, because I wanted to make the costume even more realistic. Okay, I didn't get to choose. What they did is they went to the wardrobe and they just picked random clothes saying, that'd be good. So I basically put it all on, and yeah, basically it was like completely like hot and like, it's imagine in costume, really hot all the time. I don't know about yours, because I was with your leather jacket on warm days, you would have been really hot in there.
Yeah, it wasn't actually leather. People make that mistake because it does look like leather on camera, but it was one of those flight jackets. So it was ideal because I had a pocket inside and I could put a hot water bottle in there. So I was invariably freezing. And then when it got too hot, I could just nonchalantly be swinging it over my shoulder. Yeah, so I was lucky. No, that sounds...
Yeah, because it was kind of all cotton, like really wool material, so it was really kind of itching on the whole body, but you had to, like, for the whole the 8 days of filming, in the kind of the hot wool and with warm weather. Well, I'll put it away. It was in Wales, it was dry, it was sunny.
Blimey.
All week.
Unusual.
Very, but when you're in costume, it was hot. But at least the shoes were comfortable.
So, kind of general question for everyone. I'll start with Eric at the end. Is there anything that you would have liked to have done on Doctor Who but didn't get to do?
Well, if we're talking about companions, I would have liked the female companion to be a little bit tougher, a little bit more real, a little bit more, contributing a little bit more. With the character of Tegan and Nyssa, they became almost redundant. It was very difficult it got more and more difficult to fit them in round stories when Tegan spent most of her time moaning and Nyssa looking aloof and whatever, and we had so many of them. There was Turlough, so 3 of them at one stage, with the exception of Turlough. He really couldn't contribute massively, because when you're out in deep space driving around in a TARDIS, and these are 2, well, Nyssa wasn't, but Tegan is from Earth, 1980 Earth. I think, what can she contribute? Every time she arrives somewhere, she has to ask, it makes it sound, well, boring to the least. But I would have liked fewer companions, and if we're going to have a female one, certainly a much tougher, more positive contribution. So I probably would have chosen someone from deep space where she would have had the sort of knowledge that could compete, as you did with Sylvester, compete with the Doctor.
Is there anywhere you would have liked to have taken Ace where you didn't get to go on the screen? Or?
Well, the only thing I can think of is when I auditioned for the role, my agent said, they want to see you because they want somebody who looks younger than they really are, which I had the good fortune to look, and they want somebody who can ride a motorbike. And I learnt to ride a motorbike when I left university, just because of London traffic and because I was a tomboy and I'd always quite fancied a motorbike. And so my agent, with my publicity photo, she put on the back, has own leathers, which to this day I'm convinced was the reason why Chris Clough saw me for the role. Because I'll tell you why. Because we had a lovely audition. He's such a nice guy. Did you ever meet Chris Clough? What a lovely guy. He now he produced. He's executive producer of The Missing. You know that with Jimmy Nesbitt and anyway, really, really great guy. We had a lovely audition. I had such a laugh. And then when I was called for a recall, it was to see the producer, John Nathan Turner, but Chris kind of introduced me, almost like his protege, you know. And the way he introduced me was, he said, "This is Sophie Aldread. She has her own leathers." I mean, as though my leathers were going to actually get me the part. Anyway, so here we go. I think, oh well, they've cast me because I look 16. I'm 24. And I'm going to ride a motorbike. Now, what I didn't realise that they were also cross-casting for Delta and the Bannermen at the time. and they chose Sarah Griffiths, who doesn't ride a motorbike, to ride the motorbike. Meanwhile, they chose me to play Ace, which was actually the right way round. I was much more suitable for that part. Did I ever get to ride a motorbike?
Oh.
I got on a motorbike in Survival, just about to ride away, and Sylvester pulls me off, gets on it himself. Sylvester, who's never ridden a motorbike in his life, sets off hell for leather over the horizon, and suddenly thinks to himself, hang on a minute, how do you stop these things? Nobody had actually realised that he couldn't ride a motorbike, because it just seems the kind of thing that Sylvester would be able to do. So off he roared, and he had to actually tip himself off the bike to stop, because he didn't realise you just pull the brakes. So there you go.
Yeah. Would you like to return to the series as...
Thanks. I'll step away for a minute.
So, would you like to return to the series as maybe another character, or...?
I would love to return to the series as a companion.
Oh, that would be good.
One thing that would be interesting, it would be quite nice, is if, let's say, the Doctor is regenerated into a female, to be the assistant to the Doctor. That could be quite fun.
Controversial, very.
Yeah. Well, they moved the Master into the Mistress.
Yeah.
So they can change the Doctor to the Doctor. Yeah.
I know it's a very controversial subject online amongst Doctor Who fans.
Yeah. But no, it'd be nice to be assistant, because that would be quite cool, because then I get to do what Ace gets to do and travel around.
Run up and down corridors.
Yes.
Now, this is a podcast interview, so have the podcasters got any questions they want to ask?
Question for Eric. In the Visitation, the aliens might not have been realised as well as they could have been. Were you happy with them?
No, not really. I mean, misery gut speaks again. No, the costume. I mean, they were trying, and the visual effects guys had got hold of some of these little tiny motors that now are everywhere, and they'd built them into the mask of the pteroleptal, so that he could have some movement. But it was there's a story as to why the actor inside the costume couldn't have his voice changed. And I learned that he said because his mother wouldn't recognise him. And I found this really rather extraordinary. This is why you're using someone, because his mother. But anyway, so no, it would, and the costume was very, very restrictive. So I'm trying to remember the actor's name. Apologies to actors.
I think he ended up running the Queen Vic, so his mum will have seen him at some point.
Oh, right.
It's basically a two-part question, because I love the alien race themselves, and I was just thinking, if you've never been approached Big Finish to say, can we have them on this? It's a lot cheaper without the makeup.
Big Finish. Well, they've never approached me to do anything. So.
Right. We'll have a word with Nikki somewhere in the building.
Hello, Nikki. Where are you?
No, because I think as a race they could really have legs, literally.
Yes.
On audio.
They could.
I always thought that.
Yes, I agree. They would. It would have made them more interesting. I mean, just being able to move around makes an actor more interesting. But they couldn't.
No, you seem to have a whole world building thing with them rather than just have them as villains of the week. They had a society, and they built beautiful things like the androids and things like that, and had a genetics background, which sounded as though they'd had more thought put into them than a lot of other creatures.
Well, it's just sort of the backstory, really. They'd come from Raga, a place called Raga, where they'd been in prison. They'd been working in the mines there, which had damaged the pteroleptal's face. They reacted badly to that. Yes, that is true. There is a sort of history to them.
Right. Just saying, because Visitation was one of my... Well, obviously that was the book that was chosen to be the making of Doctor Who, which for a lot of us was one of the books that we always carried around with us.
Right.
Because in the early years of fandom, there wasn't a lot of stuff that we had access to, and the Visitation was the story that had been chosen to concentrate in that, and we all sort of... That was the one we all knew most about because we'd read that and carried it around with us.
I think that was nothing particularly special for the Visitation, because it just happened to be the story in production when the author approached John.
Anyone else want to ask any questions? Tim?
Sophie, I was at the Strangeness in Space event. Does that give you a blatant excuse to plug Strangeness in Space?
Oh, how kind. Yeah, talking of podcasts. Well, Strangeness in Space is a project I've been involved with for about a year and a half, with some very old friends of mine from university, in fact, Trev and Simon, who swing their pants and don't do duvets. And basically, another friend of ours, Claire, who we were at university with, is an executive producer on podcasts and radio and so on. And she suggested that we all work together. So Trev and Simon wrote this script for us, which I just took one look at and thought, this is great. It made me laugh. I know I've got a slightly strange sense of humour, but and it's just been amazing. We've been so pleased with it. We've done 4 episodes so far. We crowdfunded the first 2, reached our goal within, I think, 2 weeks, which was amazing. And people have been so generous and very, very supportive of it. Yeah, including people like Jenny here. Yeah, she's been amazing. So we've done 2 more episodes. We're just beginning the 5th and the 6th. And basically, it's a story. I play a character called Sophie, funnily enough. Trev and Simon play Trev and Simon. I am the manageress of a gift shop in a space centre, not unlike this space centre in Leicester, who inadvertently gets blasted off into space in a test rocket with Trev and Simon, who belong to an 80s pop synth duo called Pink Custard, which is loosely based on Blancmange. And it's a family listening show with their kind of mad humour and me desperately trying to hold it all together. But it's done really well. We reached number 6 in the iTunes podcasts for comedy, and we were in the Guardian a few weeks ago had a thing about the 50 podcasts that you must listen to, and we were in the top 50. So we're really pleased, and the beauty of doing something like that as a podcast is that you have complete control over your material. You don't have to hang around waiting to be commissioned and then be cut and told what to do. So we've actually, in a way, I think it's going to be a future of broadcasting the podcast. You know yourselves. I mean, it's a very democratic and wonderful medium, because if people like you, they listen, and if they don't, they don't. Yeah, we're just so pleased with it. But yeah, if you haven't listened to it, you can download it for free either on the website www.strangenessinspace.com or from iTunes as well. So fun for all the family, and it's free. That's a lot of F's, isn't it?
And you also did songs well them as well, didn't you?
Yeah, there's a song per episode. It's a mad song. Yeah.
I'm actually doing an event in Peterborough in October with Trevor and Simon, so
there you
I'm
go.
looking forward to that. So.
Yeah, they're great fun.
Tiny question for Sophie. You do a lot of stuff for Big Finish with Ace, but Ace has now got so much stuff going on. You've got Ace with Hex, you've got Ace in the new Gallifrey series, you've got Ace now with Mel again, so you've got old Mel but still fairly young Ace, but then you've got the stuff that's adapted for books. How do you keep track of which Ace you're being and where in her life you are? Because there's alternative universe Ace and all sorts going on.
Yes, it's very funny to be given all these different Aces to do. I love it because and what always informs Ace is, like with any other script that you get as an actor, which is the script. That's where you start. It's it's these guys who they're writing something specific, and it's through your interpretation of what they've written and that script. I don't know. I don't really have to think about it because it's all there, written down already. So yeah, I mean it's great script writing. It's good story writing, and also the fact that these guys who write these amazing scripts, they know the character of Ace really well, Occasionally there's something that I don't think she would have said, or like a little mistake or something like that, but on the whole it all comes from the script. And I haven't got a favourite way of playing Ace either. I'm equally... Fiesta of the Damned has just come out, and I realised actually a while back that people would say, oh, I loved so-and-so, what about the bit where you... And of course, if you're recording something over 2 days, an episode over 2, you forget it very quickly, and you're also only reading your own scenes. If you're doing a TV performance, as we were doing in those days, it's so much more memorable because often we're away on location, so I can remember so much more about the stories that I did. Whereas with Big Finish, it's almost like they're in and out. So I decided to listen to them because I wanted to be able to talk about them. And I've just started listening to Fiesta of the Damned, and it's very much, as you say, older Mel, but Ace is still the Ace.
She's more developed than she was in the earlier Big Finishes, but she's still younger than I would say she would be in the Virgin Novel adaptation.
Yes.
That you get, and so that it's definitely there in the performances from everyone.
Yeah.
As well, but I'm halfway through Fiesta of the Damned. I was listening to it on the way down.
Yes.
So don't spoil the end.
No, I won't.
I think the fascists might win Spain, but I don't know.
I'm not giving it away.
But anyway, yeah, it's remarkably good hearing you and Bonnie together on audio, because you only got the one story on TV. What's it like working together in your little booths?
Oh, it's great. Well, it was really funny because for the moment I saw Bonnie again, and we have seen each other at conventions and stuff like that. It was quite hard to get us out of the green room, stop us talking, and get us into the studio. But once we did, we were right next to each other. So Bonnie's there, and I'm here, and Sylvester's on my right. And funnily enough, it was Bonnie who was doing most of the laughing. There was one point where she completely corpsed herself, and she was laughing so hard. It was so funny. Sylvester and I were laughing at her, because she literally couldn't carry on. Yeah, we had such a good time. And I think actually Ken Bentley says in one of the interviews, those interviews that they do after the stories, he said, I don't think he said he'd ever seen... He said he knew actors get on really well together, but he hadn't realised till he saw Bonnie and me chatting away how well we get on together. And it's so funny because we're not at all like each other. We're very different people, but somehow we really get on so well together.
Right now, obviously we've talked about Doctor Who and a few other things, but one of the big roles is Trefu Tom.
Of course.
How did David Tennant react to finding out that he was your assistant?
Yes, exactly. My sidekick, David Tennant. It was so funny because, of course, I'd met David before when we did Colditz for Big Finish, and he was an unknown then. And in fact, Nick will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he actually asked Nick Briggs if he could please do a Big Finish. And there's some story about how he was going to be a spear carrier at the National or something, or he could do the Big Finish, and he wanted to do the Big Finish. Anyway, that may all have been in my head or in a dream somewhere, but check with Nick, that one. So it was really lovely to see him again, and I loved working with him because he's just such a professional, brilliant actor. He can just take anything on and do it fantastically. And so playing a little acorn sprite who's mischievous and cheeky was no problem to him. But it was quite dangerous standing next to him, because we did it as an ensemble, which was amazing. I love doing animation that way. It's the nicest way to do it. When I do, because I'm producing a different voice for Trefu Tom, and I might not do it because I might start coughing, but I'll see if I can do it at the end of the story. I'm very still and quite tense. I have to do a lot of sort of, work because I'm producing a different voice. Whereas David is like, he's so tall anyway, and he's all long and gangly. So he was standing next to me like this, doing his character, and I'm like this, sort of trying to avoid his long arms like this. But it was great fun to work with him. Really good.
Yes, well, I'm afraid we've got to wrap up now because we've got the next guests in. So, everybody, please put your hands together.
Thank you. Well, we do those.
Thanks for having us in Cinema 2. See you soon for some more adventures. Chewy Foo, go!
That was the Doctor Who Tin Dog podcast, available on iTunes, YouTube, Twitter, RSS, Vimeo, and across the internet. Doctor Who and its associated properties are all copyright and trademark of the BBC. No infringement is intended. Why not become a supporter by visiting patreon.com/tindog. Contact the show on tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk. The Tin Dog podcast is a founder member of the Doctor Who Podcast Alliance.